Hi, everyone. Welcome to this workshop about human trafficking. My name is Loida, and I'm going to be sharing with my partner, Myrto, about human trafficking, what is the problem, and what are the potential solutions that we have. So we have a short time. So I'm going to try to explain the best I can what is human trafficking. So I'm going to share my screen. So as I say, welcome to the human trafficking workshop. How can we help? That's a good question to answer today, and we hope to do it. So first of all, I'm part of an international organization, which is called LE20. And we fight against human trafficking. We started our work 13 years ago, and we are in 14 countries around the world working against human trafficking. So here we are, our offices. So I encourage you to, after this workshop, if you want more information about our work, you can just go to our website that I will show the website later. So this is our mission, and this is the mission that I hope you take for yourself: abolish slavery everywhere and forever. So what is human trafficking? That's the main question that we have, and we hope to answer today. So human trafficking is basically modern slavery. So this is the concept that we use when we refer to human trafficking. It's not a concept that we have used internally, but it's a concept that is used in almost every document or investigation that you can read. So human trafficking is modern slavery. And we have to be aware that it's something that is happening around the world. And we will talk about that later. So this is the definition of human trafficking based on the Palermo Protocol from the United Nations. So it's a very important definition, because this is the base that the different national laws are taking in order to legislate about human trafficking. So trafficking in persons shall mean the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring of or receipt of person by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payment or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. That's a very important word, exploitation. Exploitation shall include, at a minimum, the exploitation of the prostitution of others or other form of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practice similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. I think it's important to read, it says at a minimum. So it's depending on the country that you are, your law will have different form of exploitation. So this is human trafficking is a global crisis. It affects every country of the world, because every country could be a country of origin, transit, or destination. Or we have countries that could be 2 or 3 of these forms. So for example, Spain, that is the country where I'm from. Our country is a country of transit because the position that we are, and our destination too. So the traffickers exploit the victims in our country, in Spain. But also in the last year, we have seen that Spain is becoming a country of origin. So it's depending on the country that you are, and it depending on maybe the geographical situation or the economic situation, your country is going to be a country of origin, transit, or destination, or 2 or 3 of these forms. So there are millions of men, women, and children in modern slavery today. So it's important to understand that human trafficking is not something that is happening in a small scale, but it's something big. In fact, we say that there are more slaves in the world than before in history. So it's a very important problem that is happening close to us. So over 70% of detected human trafficking victims are women and girls. So this is important also to know that it affects more women and girls than men, but obviously men, as we have just read, men, women, children are affected by this crime. It generates an estimate of $150.2 billion US dollar per year. So it's a very lucrative crime. The traffickers are on this business because it generates a lot of money. And 1 in 4 human trafficking victims are children. So as you say, there's a very important thing that we have to look at vulnerability, and we will see this in a moment, but vulnerability is something key, and it plays a very important role in human trafficking. So we have here some types of exploitation, and I say before, it's depending on your country, and in the law of your country, you will find other forms of exploitation, but I just want to tell you about the main types that we normally found in legislation. So sexual exploitation, which is forcing, deceiving, or coercing a person to perform a commercial sex act. And this is in relationship with prostitution, pornography, and I know Myrto will talk about that later. So labor trafficking is forcing a person to work in captivity for little or no pay. So we are not talking about bad conditions, but we are talking about exploitation. We will understand this as I speak. But domestic servitude, forced marriage, forced criminality, child soldiers, organ harvesting. So these all are types of exploitation, but we have to in order to different, what is the difference between exploitation and human trafficking, we have to understand the Palermo Protocol, because it's very important that we understand the act, the means, and the purpose. So I don't have enough time to cover all of this information, but I encourage you, if you want to know more about human trafficking after this workshop, just keep reading and just keep researching about human trafficking, the difference between human trafficking and exploitation, because it's a very complex crime. And it took time to understand what is the problem. But I just want to show you these types of exploitation. So how does human trafficking occur? So as I told you, slavery is something that is happening, and we have millions of people that are slaves today. So one of the main questions that I had when I tried to start to investigate about human trafficking was this: like how does human trafficking occur? So I want to show you a video.
Everyone is born with the right to be free, but not everyone gets that opportunity. Modern-day slavery is a global crisis impacting more than 40 million people in our world today. That's 1 out of every 200 of us. It's in our nations and in our cities, in our communities, and in our homes. Introducing the global crime of contradictions, human trafficking. It's low in risk, but high in profit. It's hidden, but in plain sight. It's illegal, but often overlooked. Now more than ever, millions of people are being exploited for their bodies and labor. But how is this happening? Well, what does every victim of human trafficking have in common? Vulnerability. Some are vulnerable because they're born into it, caught up in poverty. living as a minority, or dealing with the pressure to provide for their family. Others are vulnerable because they run into it, fleeing brokenness and abuse. And still, others are vulnerable because they are found in the middle of it, faced with conflict, natural disasters, or war zones. Victims of slavery are often just human beings who are searching for something better, a better job, a better relationship, a better future, a better life. Traffickers are focused on turning human expectation into exploitation through force, fraud, or coercion. After people are recruited and exploited, months or years can pass, forced to dance on the streets of Bangkok, cook food in a London household, stitch clothes in a Mumbai factory, build buildings in Barcelona, or being trafficked for sex across a dozen American cities. Tragically, few victims bravely escape or find rescue. For those that do, the experience of exploitation amplifies unresolved vulnerability, and without intervention, victims can become victims over and over again. Vulnerability, exploitation, re-victimization. Vulnerability, exploitation, re-victimization. Do you see it? Human trafficking is a cycle, but all over the world, the cycle is breaking. We know how to stop the cycle of trafficking, and with your help, we will.
Okay, so yes, I want to explain you, or as we watch in the video, the cycle of human trafficking. It's very important to understand that vulnerability is something that is very key, and the most of victims are vulnerable. So they are exposed to risk factor, violence, abuse, poor education, poverty, as you can read there. And this, what happened is the traffickers, they take advantage of this of the needs, and they offer a new life, a new false new job opportunity, a false relationship. So with that, they kept the attention of the victim, and exploitation occurs. So the victim are forced to do things that they don't want to do, just because they fear that something happens to their families, to them, to their situation. So the fear is something that keep the victims doing something that they don't want to do. And after that, revictimization. So if a survivor exits a trafficking situation, the resultant trauma compound with the original unresolved risk factors perpetuates the likelihood of being exploited, and thus the cycle of trafficking continues. So we have to give a good response and holistic response. So I just want to give you like a couple or solution as A21, what we are working for. So I don't have enough time, but I just want to give you this quick perspective. So we as an organization, we work in 3 areas to give an answer to this cycle of human trafficking. So we work with REACH, education, prevention, and awareness, with rescue. So we partner with authorities to secure the freedom and the rescue of victims, and restore. So empowering survivors of human trafficking on their unique journey toward restoration and independence. So I just want to show you some pictures. So I encourage you to go to our website and just find more information about human trafficking and how we are working against this problem. But I just want to show some of these pictures on education, prevention, and awareness. So we have a lot of educational material, campaigns. We partner with different organizations and entities. So I want to give you this website, a21.org. it's like education. So you can find here our free resources in different language. I think it's like 12 languages. So probably you will find your language. But these all resources are free, and you can learn more about human trafficking and teach other people about the problem. So rescue. So we have national hotlines. We run victim identification operation. We do professional trainings in order to identify victims. We offer legal assistance. We have child advocacy centers. At last, restore. We have aftercare service for survivors and victims of human trafficking. We have freedom service, 821 homes, emergency shelters, accommodation, and 821 survivor relocation services. So as I say, this is a very brief workshop on human trafficking. But yeah, just keep researching. Yes, if you have any other question, you can always email us, reach out us in social media or in our website. So I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you to the team of Lausanne for inviting us to do this workshop. And just I just pass over this presentation to Myrto, that she will be covering the rest of this workshop. So thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Myrto Theocharous from Greece, and today I would like to talk to you about reforming our minds on trafficking and prostitution. So, sex trafficking and prostitution go hand in hand, since sex trafficking is often hidden in the prostitution market. So, regardless of whether prostitution is legal or illegal in your country, you will see that it is a subset of prostitution. So therefore, the trafficked victim is first encountered as a prostitute, and only subsequently does it become clear that this prostitute is a victim of trafficking. So how is it possible then for someone to shift from seeing a prostitute with all the ugly connotations this word is carrying to seeing a victim of oppression, a wanted sheep of God? So the mind of the seer needs to be re-educated on how to view the so-called prostitute, so that whenever one of us hears about or reads about or encounters a prostituted woman, will maintain a mind so open that it may be able to discern her victimization and her state of slavery. No, she will not tell you herself which category she belongs to. All the girls in the brothels look the same. They are in the same context. They speak the same way, and almost all of them, on first encounter, will claim that they do what they do out of their own free will. So the responsibility is on us to reform our minds and our approaches. We must purify our eyes from the inherited stereotypes that the world has given us in order to see with justice. So the Bible helps us train our eyes in this way. So we should look at some examples together and see how the biblical writers guide us. So in Genesis 34, we read about the rape of Dinah, and we hear her brothers justify the revenge they took against Shechem with the following question: Should he have treated our sister as a prostitute? So this statement betrays a shared perception that the prostituting of a woman brings shame on the men who are the guardians of female sexuality. Therefore, Shechem's fault was his failure to acknowledge that Dinah belonged to a broader network of relations, and therefore the damage done to her is equivalent to damage done on the entire patriarchal house to which she belongs. So here we are living in the patriarchal society of the ancient Near East, where sexuality is not an issue of the individual, but it is a valuable asset under the guardianship of the patriarchal house. Therefore, the statement that Shechem treated Dinah as if she were a prostitute does not mean that he paid for a sexual visit. What it means is that he treated her as if her guardians did not exist, as if she was abandoned. So this expression is extremely enlightening for the following examples we shall see, precisely because it is the abandoned and unprotected women who are in danger of finding themselves in prostitution. In the case of Tamar in Genesis 38, we are given an indication of how a woman could end up in prostitution. Tamar is a widow as well as childless, and according to the instructions for levirate marriage, it is the duty of a relative of the dead husband to marry her. If this was not possible, then the patriarch himself, Judas in this instant, is obliged to be the one who will give her children that will carry the name of the dead husband. But Judas' neglect, which is in fact a legal transgression, forces her to a dangerous plan to disguise herself as a prostitute, entice Judah, and secure descendants in this manner. So the only social power available to her is to sexually entice. The story shows that the law is on the widow's side, but at the same time, it presents the danger into which the neglect of the law may push a woman if she's to survive. So in other words, the text is inviting the reader into a deeper and fairer understanding of the women one may encounter on the side of the street. In fact, the author has Judas declare that she is more righteous than I. So the law-abiding Israelites in the story are quick to implement the law and demand Tamar's punishment, teaching us that zeal for God's law combined with a superficial understanding of these women amounts to injustice and further victimization. One should go behind the surface and explore the deeper reality and underlying factors that led this woman to this desperate behavior. Now, the widow Ruth faces a similar danger. Here's a woman who's also a foreigner in Israel. The danger of her being sexually taken advantage of is heightened, and it's betrayed in Boaz's words, who had to give instructions to his own workers not to touch her in 2:9. This reality is confirmed by her mother-in-law, Naomi, who tells her that if she moves to other fields, she will most likely be raped. This is 2:22. So the survival of these two women depends again on whether the law regarding the purchase of their inheritance by their closest relative and the levirate marriage law are kept. So Boaz does not take immediate action to see to it that these laws are applied when he learns about Ruth and Naomi's return to the land. And this fact, again, forces the women to risky solutions. Ruth risks by lying next to Boaz one night, hoping that this enticement will lead him to marry her rather than treat her like a prostitute. So these examples do not describe prostitution per se, but they show us the circumstances that often led women, and especially widows, into unwanted and sexually dangerous means of survival. So the main reasons then are the neglect for the rights of the widow by the patriarchal house and the difficult conditions of survival. Now, in the case of Rahab, we have in the book of Joshua, here we're dealing with a prostitute in Jericho. So a woman who is actually attributed with great substance and a critical role in the narrative. She dominates the largest part of the dialogue between herself and the spies where she appears to be intelligent, dynamic, with active political initiative and theological correctness. She is the one who offers protection to the men and a successful escape to the spies. But what is most important is that she's able to negotiate a covenant with the military leaders of Israel. So by the end, the label prostitute, with all the stereotypes it carries, proves to be completely inadequate to represent the magnitude of this individual. Oh, the eyes these spies must have possessed to see before them an equal. So there are indications that in poor families, the girls were pushed into prostitution as the basic means of survival. Rahab was prostituted with the full knowledge of her family, 6:23 of the book of Joshua. This phenomenon may be unknown in the West, but unfortunately, it is very common in Asia, for example, where the children are driven to prostitution for the survival of the family. But perhaps something similar is happening in this case too, in the land of Israel, in the land of Canaan. So we have Leviticus 19:29, that implies the existence of such a practice in Israel, since the writers are opposing it as contrary to God's law. They say, do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will turn to prostitution and be filled with wickedness. So poverty and hunger are the basic causes of prostitution then and now. According to Proverbs 6:26, it was a known fact that a woman prostitutes herself for a loaf of bread. For this reason, the book of Deuteronomy gives repetitive commands for the care of the widow and the orphan, since the loss of paternal or spousal care, as we have already seen, forces people into prostitution as a means of survival. God himself takes the side of the widow and the orphan, and he becomes the example for all Israelites to emulate. Let's look at Deuteronomy 10:18. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. If one systematizes the law of Israel, they will see that the writers leave no room for the practice of prostitution. Since all Israelites are forbidden from prostituting their daughters, and since there is a prohibition for a sexual relationship with an unmarried woman that is not followed by an agreement to marriage, according to Deuteronomy 22, how could prostitution in Israel stand? Well, it is interesting that Judah in Genesis 38 is seeking a prostitute outside the borders of Israel in the land of Timnah, in the area of Timnah. And Timnah is a Philistine town known from Samson's visit to find a woman there in Judges 14. And later, Samson too is looking for a prostitute in the town of Gaza, also in a Philistine territory, which is something that shows that possibly whoever was looking for a prostitute would probably not be able to find her within Israelite territory. Perhaps he wanted to hide his act, or perhaps because there was not much tolerance for this market within the Israelite borders. Moreover, Israelite women who were forced into prostitution would also have had to move outside the borders in order to find clients. And this is what we see with Tamar. So in view of Israelite law, then, prostitution could function only in cases of a father's absence or of a responsible relative or husband, the absence of these, meaning that when there is absence of defense, support, and basic means of survival. Sadly, God's repetitive exhortations for the care of these vulnerable individuals were not enough to move the Israelites to justice. Margaret Davies notes indications in the Bible that one could possibly see prostitutes in the streets and in the squares of Israel, playing music, singing, and even wearing a distinct type of clothing. These are some references from the prophets of Israel. Prostitution, then, as we have seen, is a symptom of the failure of the Israelite to practice the justice he was called to live. This conclusion that arises from the biblical text demands from us a certain lens for viewing the prostitute primarily as the victim of factors of injustice, rather than as a corrupt individual who freely chooses this lifestyle. Only by replacing our stereotype of the prostitute with the biblical lens do we have a chance of seeking out, discovering, and helping the trafficked victims trapped in the webs of prostitution. Thank you very much.